Iran says it is seeking dialogue with protest leaders after a third day of unrest.
Iran didn't just wake up to protests. It woke up to a country grinding to a halt. Markets shut their doors. Universities closed overnight. Government buildings were stormed. And in city after city, people chanted words the regime fears most. Down with the dictator and down with Khamenei. But here's what makes this moment different. This uprising isn't only about inflation, or a collapsing currency, or even repression. It's happening while Iran's closest so-called ally, Russia, is quietly stepping back, exposing just how fragile that partnership really is. Tonight, we're not just asking why Iranians are protesting. We're asking a far more dangerous question. What happens when a regime faces unrest at home and can no longer rely on power abroad? To understand Iran's unrest, we need to discard common misconceptions. This is not a sudden riot, a short-term economic protest, or something fixable with arrests or cabinet reshuffles. What we are seeing is the visible collapse of a long-broken social contract. For years, the Iranian state survived on a fragile bargain, endure hardship and repression in exchange for basic stability, food, water, electricity, and a relatively stable currency. That bargain has collapsed. The protest began not with activists, but with economic paralysis. When Iran's currency plunged at the end of 2025, prices exploded. Food costs jumped over 70%, medical goods surged 50%, imports became unaffordable, and savings evaporated. People didn't immediately march in the streets. They stopped participating. Merchants closed shops, universities shut down, and 21 of 31 provinces were effectively frozen under public holidays, a government attempt to curb unrest. When citizens did take to the streets, their anger went beyond prices. Chants like, "Down with Khamenei," "Down with the dictator," and "Azadi," freedom, signalled outright rejection, not mere calls for reform. President Masoud Pezeshkian acknowledged the unrest, promising to listen to protesters' legitimate demands. A rare concession in Iran's political system, showing the pressure is real and sustained. This movement cuts across class, geography, and generation. Bazaar merchants, university students, urban workers, residents of Tehran, Shiraz, Isfahan, Kermanshah, Farsa, and beyond. It is a population united by a shared conclusion: the system no longer works. The danger for the regime is compounded by visible failures. Rolling blackouts during record heat, water shortages draining reservoirs, and an economy crushed by sanctions and mismanagement. This protest is not about tomorrow's prices. It's about whether the state can function at all. When dissent shifts from demands to disbelief, from "fix this" to "this cannot be fixed," governments enter extremely risky territory. To understand why Iran's leadership is so alarmed, you have to look at where the protests began: the bazaars. Not universities, not social media, but the markets themselves. In Iran, the bazaar is more than a marketplace. It is an institution. For centuries, it has been the economic backbone of urban life, a hub for trade, credit, employment, and informal welfare. It is also a political force. During the 1979 Islamic Revolution, bazaris financed strikes, shut down commerce, and helped unravel the Shah's authority. That memory still resonates in Tehran. When shopkeepers pulled down shutters in late 2025, the regime immediately recognized the signal. This was calculated defiance, not fear-driven protest. Merchants were reacting to a currency collapse that pushed the rial to record lows, destroyed profit margins, and made imports unaffordable. More than that, they were protesting the loss of predictability itself. Trust in prices, supply chains, and tomorrow. Closed bazaars have serious consequences: no cash flow, no tax revenue, and no illusion of normal economic life. That's why authorities declared sudden public holidays, shutting universities and offices across 21 provinces. Not generosity, but containment. Merchants even stated they were willing to absorb financial losses to protest years of mismanagement and declining prospects for the next generation. That goes beyond anger. It reflects lost confidence in the system. When the bazaar walks away, governments don't fall immediately, but they rarely recover. This is why Iran's leadership is deeply nervous. In protests, slogans are more than just words. They are windows into the mindset of the people. And in Iran today, the slogans being chanted reveal something that goes far beyond simple discontent. Videos shared widely on social media show crowds in Tehran, Shiraz, Isfahan, and other cities shouting, "Down with Khamenei! Down with the dictator! Azadi!" which means freedom. Don't be afraid, we are together. Each of these chants is significant in its own way. Down with Khamenei and Down with the dictator directly challenged the legitimacy of the supreme leader, the central pillar of Iran's political system. Unlike economic grievances, which can sometimes be appeased through policy measures, attacks on leadership legitimacy strike at the very foundation of the regime. Azadi and Don't Be Afraid, We Are Together reflect collective confidence and solidarity. They show that fear, long used as a tool of social control, is beginning to erode. People are openly declaring that they will not be intimidated, signalling a shift from isolated protests to a broader movement of societal defiance. Today, slogans are existential, reflecting anger at systemic failure, economic collapse, infrastructure shortages, corruption, and the government's inability to secure basic services. President Masoud Pezeshkian has acknowledged the intensity of public anger and the legitimacy of these demands. By recognizing protesters' calls, he indirectly admits that the slogans are not just noise, but a barometer of widespread societal crisis. The importance of slogans is also strategic. When chants like Azadi echo across multiple cities and demographic groups, they transcend individual grievances, creating a shared language of dissent. This makes repression harder and protests more resilient. The protests in Iran are not just social or symbolic. They are the natural consequence of a crumbling economy meeting an overstretched political system. Let's break it down. In 2025, the Iranian rial plunged to record lows, losing nearly half its value against the US dollar over the year. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Inflation surged above 50%, according to official figures. Food prices jumped 72%, making basic necessities unaffordable. Medical goods increased 50%, hitting hospitals and households alike. Imports became nearly impossible for ordinary citizens. Savings evaporated. Pensions lost purchasing power. Even the middle class, long insulated from unrest, felt the pinch. But here's the key point. Economic collapse does not automatically lead to political explosion. It only does so when people conclude that their grievances cannot be addressed within the system. That threshold has now been crossed in Iran. President Masoud Pezeshkian acknowledged this in late 2025, stating that the government would listen to the protesters. But concessions like this, while necessary, are not enough when the crisis is systemic. By Sunday, protests erupted across Tehran's bazaars. By Tuesday, students and residents in Shiraz, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Farsa had joined in. clashes with security forces intensified. In Farsa, demonstrators tried to storm a government complex, including the governor's office. 4 protesters were arrested, and several police officers were injured. The social contract, the promise that the state provides stability in exchange for compliance, has collapsed. Citizens aren't merely asking for reforms, they are rejecting the system's ability to govern effectively. This is why analysts describe the unrest as an economic collapse triggering a political explosion. Inflation and currency devaluation are catalysts, but when every aspect of daily life – jobs, markets, food, medicine, water, electricity – becomes a source of hardship, citizens take to the streets in force. The government's response has included sudden public holidays, shutdowns of universities and government offices, military helicopters over urban centres, arrests and security warnings. These measures, however, underscore the regime's fragility, signalling that normal law and order mechanisms are no longer enough to contain unrest. Amid domestic turmoil, the Iranian government leans on its alliance with Russia. On paper, the partnership looks formidable. Russia promises military support, nuclear cooperation, and advanced technology. Iran, in return, provides drones and weapons for Russia's war in Ukraine. But the reality is different. Russia's support is selective and transactional. During the 12-day war with Israel, Tehran received little help, exposing military vulnerabilities. Nuclear promises, such as the $25 billion deal for 4 nuclear power plants in Iran, remain largely unfulfilled. David Jalilvand, Middle East analyst, told DW, "As far as the further expansion of Iran's nuclear program is concerned, Moscow has so far promised much and delivered little. Even conservative Iranian officials admit the alliance is unequal and unreliable." Mohammad Sadr of Iran's Expediency Discernment Council said, "The strategic agreement with Russia has proven to be a farce. Russia is not trustworthy. To believe that it would stand by us or take on the US is absurd." Public perception mirrors this skepticism. Many Iranians see the government's reliance on Moscow not as protection, but as a tool to maintain elite power at the expense of the people. The 12-day war with Israel in 2025 was a wake-up call for the Iranian regime. It exposed military weaknesses, alliance limits, and political vulnerability. To respond, Tehran adopted a dual strategy. 1. Controlled concessions. President Pezeshkian promised to listen to protesters and appointed Abdulnazar Hemati as head of the central bank. 2. Selective repression. Supreme Leader Khamenei appointed IRGC Brigadier General Ahmad Vahidi as Deputy Commander-in-Chief, signalling a tougher security posture. Additionally, some social restrictions were relaxed, such as loosening the morality police's enforcement in Tehran, not out of reformist ideals, but to prevent further radicalization. Current protests are dangerous and revealing. They expose governance limits, unreliable alliances, and the growing gap between elite survival strategies and ordinary citizens' daily struggles. While the economic crisis drives street protests, Iran is also facing an infrastructure meltdown. Water shortages and electricity failures are no longer minor inconveniences. They have become a political and social emergency. In 2025, southern cities like Avaz, Shush, Ramhormoz, Omidyeh, and Shadigan experienced heat waves above 50 degrees Celsius, while rolling blackouts and water cuts made daily life a struggle. In southeast Tehran, only 23 million cubic meters of water remained out of 250 million cubic meters of reservoir capacity. President Masoud Pezeshkian warned in July 2025, The water crisis is far more serious than what is being publicly discussed. Without urgent action, Iran would face a situation for which no remedy can be found. Lawmakers openly criticized the energy ministry. One declared, "You've turned Khuzestan into hell." Another added, "Farmers, workers, patients, everyone is angry, and the energy minister hasn't even shown up in parliament to answer for it." Emergency shutdowns, like the closure of Tehran on July 28, 2025, temporarily saved water and electricity, but analysts note these are short-term fixes. Unlike currency fluctuations, infrastructure failures are immediately felt by citizens. No water, stifling heat, rolling blackouts, every sector of daily life is affected. Combined with economic collapse, this creates a perfect storm for unrest. Iran's protests are now multi-layered. Citizens are angry about inflation, governance, and oppression, but also furious about a state that cannot provide even the most basic necessities. While the government points to Moscow as a lifeline, the reality is stark. Russia is using Iran as a strategic card, not a partner. Russia's goals are clear: leverage Iran for international negotiation, gain influence in the Middle East, and secure military and drone support for its war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Iranian citizens face inflation, power cuts, water shortages, and food insecurity. Afshar Soleimani, former ambassador, summarized it well. Russia's influence in Iran's centers of power is undeniable. As long as this political movement remains in power, little will change, and the population will bear the consequences. The alliance benefits elites, not the people. Russia's selective support highlights a crucial gap between government strategy and public need, fueling domestic anger and adding to the pressure on the regime. The unrest in Iran isn't just a domestic crisis. It has regional and global consequences that could reshape power dynamics across the Middle East. Iran's domestic fragility is clear. Widespread protests, economic collapse, and infrastructure failures weaken Tehran's ability to project power abroad. Historically, a key player in conflicts across Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, the regime is now preoccupied with survival, limiting its influence over proxies and opening space for other regional powers. The so-called alliance with Russia is also less reliable than it appears. Moscow's support is selective and strategic, not unconditional. As David Jalilvand explained, Russia has no interest in expanding the circle of nuclear powers in the already unstable Middle East. Russia is primarily using the Iran card strategically as part of its negotiating position with the United States. This means Iran's global leverage is largely symbolic, while its population bears the real cost of economic and infrastructure collapse. The unrest also matters for the West and Israel. Domestic instability could limit Iran's nuclear ambitions, proxy operations, and regional influence, while highlighting the limits of sanctions. Pressure contributes to hardship but doesn't topple the regime. Finally, these protests could inspire wider unrest across the Middle East. A regime long considered unshakable is showing cracks, forcing global powers to reassess alliances, security commitments, and contingency planning in a region where instability spreads fast. Iran is at a crossroads. Citizens are demanding economic stability, access to water and electricity, and accountability, while the government leans on fragile alliances and selective reforms to maintain control. This is not just a protest. It is a warning shot from a society pushed to the brink. The combination of economic collapse, infrastructure failure, and political discontent could reshape Iran's future and influence the Middle East. The message from the streets is clear. The people will no longer tolerate a system that fails to provide the basics of life or stability.